Hi, everyone. So the world is talking a lot about artificial intelligence, but I believe the real conversation needs to be around human intelligence. There are 1.8 billion kids in the schooling system today, but despite going through 12 years of education, and regardless of being in a poor country or a rich country, they're going to graduate and not be fluent in a critical 21st century literacy, which is programming. And that's a huge problem. With the advent of AI, the world is now digital. And so it's not enough to just use technology anymore. You actually have to know how it works and how to create it. It's almost like you have software development as an industry that's gone up and merged with every single other profession that exists. So no matter what you want to become, whether it's a doctor, lawyer, engineer, I don't know, even an artist, it feels like you will need to have tech literacy. It's as foundational as reading, writing, or doing math. But our schools are not geared for this. Schools were designed in the 19th century, and they're being run by teachers and administrators from the 20th century. And so most are failing in achieving 21st century skills. There's this trope in education reform where Rip Van Winkle, the guy from the fairy tale who fell asleep from 100 years, if he was to wake up today, he would be amazed by all the progress with internet and space travel and self-driving cars and whatnot. But if he was to walk into a classroom, he would see exactly what he saw 100 years ago. And that's a big problem globally. But at the same time, it's even more important for countries like Pakistan and others in the global south, which have large young populations, more so than ever before in the history of our country, actually. And the global south is on track to house 80% of the world's population by the end of the century. And nothing brings home the scale of this issue than the story of these two kids. On one side, you have Zoya. She lives in a developed country, one of the highest ranking public education systems in the world. And it's almost like the government, the school, her parents have spared no expense in investing in her education. And on the other side, you have Mustafa. He lives in an urban slum. His mother works as a maid, domestic staff worker, and she does not have any time or money to invest in his education, for sure. His school doesn't even have electricity, let alone the internet. But both of them are being failed by the system because both of them will not have the coding literacy that they need to survive the future. It's a digital future. They're going to come into the workplace, and using an AI tool will be like using a calculator but not knowing what math is. And so I know this because I've been in the education and skills training space in the nonprofit sector for the last 20 years. I'm very familiar with this idea of education disparity and economic disparity. But nothing brought it home than 5 years ago in the pandemic when all the schools had gone online. And my son, he was around 8 at the time, pictured here, it was the tail end of grade 2. And I overheard his online coding class. Now at that point, he, like 40% of Pakistan's children, was enrolled in the private sector. And so there's no economic disparity there. And I was shocked by what I heard. It was, on one side, this boring version of math where the kids were doing these meaningless drills on a self-paced app. And the teacher just was failing to engage, didn't quite understand herself what the underlying concepts were. And a girl got so frustrated that she actually started crying in that class. And so that's when I realized that, you know, it's not just, I felt like I had a solution, even though it felt a little strange because I'm a digital immigrant myself. That's me in the 80s with my co-founder and younger brother, Asad. And so, you know, I felt like we had early exposure to tech. My father had done some programming in the 60s when he was studying his engineering degree. At that time, there were third-generation computers, and you had to feed in the code as punch cards into the computer to do calculations, similar to how you put in a paper into a printer today. And in the late 80s, around this time, is when I had learned Logo, which is one of the earliest coding for kids languages that had come out of MIT a decade before. And my brother had taught himself C in the early 90s through books. And it's less because we were nerds, okay, because we were, but I think it was because at that time, pre-internet, analog age, anything to do with tech was incredibly exciting. It was like associated with gaming, Atari, Nintendo. It was just so fresh and so new and so exciting. And that's the energy that I wanted my son and his friends to have. And so I started this informal coding class where all we did was make games and learn programming through that. And before I knew it, they had played those games with their friends, siblings, cousins, and we had hundreds of parents that were interested in enrolling. And that's when I realized that I'd stepped into not just a solution for my own problem, but we were at this global inflection point in curriculum systems around the world, where everyone had started realizing that coding for kids is important, and governments and schools and parents were trying to find solutions for this. Today, we have over 2/3 of the countries around the world that have mandated computer science and therefore coding into their curriculum. And half of those have come on board since the last 5 years when I did my first informal coding class. But here's what's key. There is still no standard playbook on what coding for kids should look like. Every single person, from policymakers to schools to parents, are asking the same questions. What do we teach? How do we teach it? What does success look like? And that's the space that we had stepped into and we decided to solve for by founding Code School. And we were first movers in the space in Pakistan. The first big problem that we faced was, what do we teach? Because it's not like there is standard curricula. It's not like there is this body of work that everyone's driving from. Coding for kids is so new, it's so fragmented, it's so, new, so evolving constantly, unlike, say, math or science that have been around for hundreds of years. No one really knows what to teach. And so I pulled in my brother, the same one who taught himself C in the 90s. And he was in big tech in Seattle at the time. He was a senior software developer. And together we created this curriculum. And this is what we felt coding for kids should look like. It evolved into a 10-year journey from grades 1 to 10. That's the schooling cycle. And the idea was not to kind of rote learn one language. The idea was that kids should get exposure to multiple languages because you never really know what's going to exist once they graduate. And the idea was not to look at just specific syntax. The idea was to take a problem and teach kids how to break it down and solve using technology, whether it's code syntax today, a low-code platform tomorrow, or an AI tool. And that's what we felt is what the world needs and what this space needs. Based on our work, I was appointed the Computer Science Curriculum Reform Lead for the Government of Pakistan's National Curriculum Council, where our work impacted 22 million children. That's the 7th largest school-going population in the world. Sorry. And then based on that, our next big problem came. Now that we knew what we were going to teach, who is going to teach it? It's not like there is this degree that says, coding for kids, and once you have it, you know how to teach it. The first kind of strategy we decided was to try to go to ICT primary school teachers to see, they seem to be the closest equivalent to what we required. And so we interviewed dozens and dozens of candidates from Pakistan. And we were actually shocked to find that not a single one of them passed our technical assessment. It was almost like there was this Venn diagram of people that went into primary schooling and programmers, and we felt like that just did not intersect at all. And so we realized that perhaps technical excellence was more important to us, so we came across computer science undergrads, young people who easily passed our technical assessment. But then we found that they were very trainable and they were open to learning a new way, a new fun way of teaching a new and fun subject. And so based on that is what helped us unlock growth. And then we flywheeled. And so using our tech, we managed to expand and reach children in 20 countries. The idea was to be a little bit like Uber for coding, but for learning. And so a parent would hail a coding class as easily as you could maybe hail an Uber. And then we would provide the right instructor with the right curriculum at the right time and place. And we were doing this all through virtual cohorting. And so after that, and so the next big thing that we decided to unlock, because we weren't ready to just stop right there, the next thing we looked at was, if you look at the countries that have introduced coding, and then you overlaid, the gray are the ones that haven't quite mandated computer science yet. And if you look at the countries that have the largest young populations, you'll see that they're almost inverse of each other. And so we realized that if we have to really get to every child and make sure no one's left behind, we have to try to crack these kind of countries which have large young populations, that don't have teachers, that are under-resourced, might not even be speaking English as a first language. And that's when we did 2 experiments. The first one came out of by this generous donor out of Karachi. And we adapted our algorithm, so that instead of sending instructors into a virtual classroom, it was quite easy to send a local instructor into an on-site classroom using the same tech. And so the main question we walked into was, will our curriculum even work? If someone does not speak English, if someone is used to rote memorization, if someone has not used a computer ever before in their lives, will we be even able to teach them coding or not using the existing curriculum? And we were amazed to find that there was absolutely no difference in learning loss or learning outcomes. Instructors had to teach in the local language, of course, and had to teach functional English for the terms that we use in coding, but otherwise, a child from a slum in Karachi, the children of domestic staff, was learning at par and achieving the same outcomes as a child from, say, the Netherlands, one of the best performing public systems in the world in terms of schooling. And that's when we realized that we were onto something. And the next big step that we decided to experiment with was to see that if the linchpin is the teacher, because remember we were sending computer science undergraduates, and that means that there was technical proficiency. But if we had to scale in under-resourced areas, that's not necessarily an assumption that would allow us to scale. So we said, let's try and see if we can flex downward. And so we partnered with this school outside of Lahore. It's a low-cost school, where we took generalist teachers and we decided to train them and upskill them in programming to see whether they would be able to deliver our curriculum or not, and see what the learning loss would look like. We've just concluded our first academic cycle, and so the jury is still out. We haven't quite gotten the results as yet. But I think anecdotally, what we found is that the teachers did learn what they needed to be able to teach in the primary years. But there was huge problems with, say, confidence. Because remember, a primary teacher is the one teacher standing in the front of the classroom teaching all of the subjects, whether it's math or science or English or Urdu. And so as a result, we're not quite sure right now in terms of policy whether they need to, whether we can flex downward and allow generalist teachers to teach coding, or if we'll need to send a subject specialist like you do for slightly older classes. But this is, what this feels like. This is what envisioning something or doing something new that hasn't been done before feels like. It's a little messy. There's no template. You don't quite know whether what you've done you've done right. And I think what keeps us going is understanding that, I'm sitting in the shade of a tree that someone planted a long time ago. Or more specifically, there's this Greek proverb that says, society grows great when old men plant trees in whose shade they will never sit. And so what we're hoping to do is plant this tree, and I'm hoping that it grows into the blueprint of what coding for kids needs to look like, where no child is left behind. In a world where if every child has to thrive,
Coding has to be acknowledged as a literacy, not something that is optional or a nice to have, and something that we must make sure gets accessible to all. Thank you.